the 300 accounts were very, very useful as part of a wide range of historical material and resources, and in many ways a key source, those accounts. But they fed into the general research, and I think I'll be right in saying that there's nowhere in the film specifically where we've dramatised something from those 300 accounts. But reading those accounts has made it possible to bring the whole thing to life creatively and inventively. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly used, like, the Reverend Stanley, who was standing above in the same house as the magistrates and standing above and looking down at the field, in order to set up what happens when and what moment does Henry Hunt turn up and so on.
We say New England outfits! We shall maintain our spirits!
You certainly use those eyewitness accounts to get the order, as it were, in order to then use that as the starting point for the actual massacre itself, for example.
But you know, all the decisions about what you actually see and the things that people do to each other and all of that stuff comes from a whole variety of sources and resources. I mean, there's no end of material available on this subject, apart from the fact it has been quite thoroughly written about over the years. You've got, have you not, the National Archive at Kew, the British Library, the very good museums in Manchester, the Chetham's, People's History Museum, the Central Library, etc., and newspapers of the period, which we looked at very helpful, and of course figure in the film.
Manchester Observer in particular, yeah. I mean, I certainly used the eyewitness accounts in the tie-in book, which is much more specifically a sort of blow-by-blow narrative history. So yes, I use those quite extensively in that. But
I think from a general historical perspective, see, if we were to make a film set in the 8th century, that's researchable, but you're talking about a film would be a very much more abstracted thing, really. It would be a very remote world to try and bring to life. But the world of 200 years ago is actually very recent. It's within its early modern documentation period. It's, I mean, the actual event itself, you have to remember, I mean, from just talking personally, it took place less than 100 years before my parents were born, which is to say the equivalent of 1918, which is, you know, makes you realise it's really quite recent. So all the stuff, apart from all the actual researchable material, it hangs in recent received history. Because obviously we're talking not only about the specific events of Peterloo, but we're talking about, you know, the quality of life and how people lived and dressed and worked and all those things, and talked, and what they sounded like, and the dialect they use, and all of those things are researchable, and we research them.
Let me get this straight now. There's going to be a big march.
Aye, Mother. At Petersfield.
Outside.
Aye.
Nor indoors.
No.
In broad daylight.
Yes.
On a Monday.
A Monday?
I know, it's daft.
You're slightly reliant on the labouring class, working class people who've written autobiographies. So a key member of the labouring class is the great radical Samuel Bamford.
And who figures in the film.
Who's one of the characters in the film. So he is a handloom weaver, silk weaver, from Middleton. But of course he's clearly had some learning. He went to the grammar school, he was taught by Methodists in the Sunday schools and so on, and then was self-taught, self-learning as well. And he is clearly very literate and erudite, and he, as I say, writes these two major autobiographies. And there are other examples of that. And we obviously looked at him in particular because he was a character in the film. There are other books that, for example, Emma Griffin's book, Liberty's Dawn, which talks about and uses the experience of the labouring class through their autobiographies, letters, and so on. But again, you feel like you're sort of seeing the tip of the iceberg, because how many people were writing autobiographies in this period anyway, let alone from the labouring class.
What right does a king have to a payout from the government of £2 million per annum? A king who has lost his senses, if he ever had any. And what right does our good, gracious, illustrious, or should I say, big fat prince have with £1.5 million?
He has no right!
But also, and this is a whole other aspect of what you could call research, all those of us, and there were quite a lot of us involved, who grew up in the Manchester area, and that includes me, were able to draw on our sense of ordinary people's dialect, accents, and of older people. Now, I was born in 1943, and so I remember people, old people, in working class Salford in the 1940s and 50s to some degree, who would have been born in 1880, 1870 even, and they would have remembered people who were take us back to damn near the period we're talking about. And how, I mean, I remember people who really talked in a quite, what even now would seem quite an archaic sort of way, and using language and words that even now have become obsolescent. And so, in a way, lots of us were able to draw on that kind of received historical memory. And I think that's important as well, actually. Hypothetically, there could be a film about Peterloo which painted the working class protesters in a bad light. It was presented them as troublemaking baddies, and that, you know, in some way whitewashed the benign and generous ruling classes and so on. I think it's a perverse notion, and the existence or the idea of such a film has only occurred to me now, at this moment, having this rather wayward conversation on the subject, because what I'm saying is that really what you're talking about looks after itself. You know, there's no way that my attitude, or probably anybody else's involved, shifted in terms of our attitude to the characters and people and events and ideas and politics and aspirations and bad behaviour and you name it, because it is what it is. And it, in a way, you know, it leads you to what are sort of non-negotiable general conclusions within the various factions. I mean, for example, one of the key factions in the film is the group of magistrates. Now, we kick off with our first view of three of the magistrates, who are all actual magistrates that existed, that we've portrayed by researching them. You see each of them doling out extreme stentorian punishments for minor offences, somebody is hanged for stealing a coat, and somebody's sent to Australia for another minor demeanour, or transported. So that's really the bad side of it. But when you see that group of magistrates, who in the end behaved very badly collectively, but within them there are voices of questioning and reasonableness and things.
I might advise you from a legal standpoint. It is essential that the true character of that assembly be allowed to reveal itself. One man, one vote. Parliamentary representation. Preposterous proposition.
Sedition.
We must allow Hunt to speak so that he be seen to be inciting a gullible mass of people to riot. Then we may act with promptitude and vigour.
What we've tried to do, and I think it's the only thing to do, is to make the world that we're depicting, bring it to life and make it real, and see people as strong and weak and vulnerable and, you know, and well-intentioned and badly intentioned and all of those things. And really, we had no struggle whatever with our ideology at any level, because we knew what that we were dealing with, and as I say, it sort of looks after itself.
It does. I mean, the National Archive has, the Home Office papers have extensive material. All the letters that went out from the Home Office are copied before they go out, so you've got the complete line of correspondence between the Home Secretary, Lord Sidmouth, his permanent secretary, Hobhouse, Henry Hobhouse, and the magistrates of Manchester and Stockport and various other places. So you can trace their opinions and their mounting panic towards the 16th of August very clearly within that primary sources. And that's a springing off point. We did several visits with the actors playing magistrates, reformers, journalists and so on to the National Archives because it was such a fabulous resource. But that's just the starting point. That's the kind of the grist, as it were, to get going on the characters and the narrative.
The Prince Regent actually did to congratulate the magistrates on having dealt with it so efficiently and to maintain the public order. I mean, that is outrageous, but he did. So obviously we didn't do a letter because letters are tedious in a film, although we actually did have some, and we found ways of them being read out and all that stuff. Because letters were all intercepted, and there were people whose job it was to intercept and all the rest of it. But all those things really happened, and you don't really have to bend over backwards to decide what you think about it, really.
It doesn't take much to find a ridiculous action by the Prince Regent anyway. I mean, it's sort of...
You can read all you like about something that happened, but bringing it to life and making it happen in front of the camera is a whole different ball game. I mean, it's locked in a book until you activate it. And activating it, you can't just say, oh, well, this is what happened, act it, because it would be as dead as indeed some films are where they do that. So, it's a whole business of creating characters, drawing from the real sources, drawing from people that the actors know that to bring the characters to life, improvising. All of the actors in the film, and you will vouch for this, got heavily into research. They were, there are different kinds of actors. There are character actors, people that don't just play themselves. Those are the sort of actors that I like to work with, and I do work with. There are plenty of other sorts of actors who are narcissists who just like to play themselves and want to be lovely, but they don't belong in a film like Peterloo, or indeed any of my films. There are also a lot of actors who are quite good actors but are thick, and they're not in this film either. This is the territory of intelligent, committed, sharp character actors. Did the research. Everyone researched their character, and they all came with stuff way beyond what would finally wind up in the film, but it all informed the energy of the film, the truthfulness of it. So all of that goes on, and we spent 6 months doing all of that stuff before we ever went out with a camera. And that's what I do. And so in a way it's no different from, one of my films where people are in a contemporary suburban house arguing with each other on a staircase. It's just a bigger version of the same thing, really. Real people, real. Jacqueline has written a book about Peterloo, which is just being published now as we speak. Having done the research, you thought it was a good idea to then write the book. Now, it's a great book, but the main single and very clear difference between the book and the film is the book is a detailed documentation with interpretation of every aspect of the event and everything surrounding it. The film cannot be that. The film is very much a dramatic distillation.
How interesting it was as a historian to research the film, work on the film with the actors, with Mike, be on the set for 4 months, and then after a very small gap, go back to the sources and start writing a narrative history of what we've just filmed, if you see what I mean. And it is, you learn a lot working on film, particularly working with Mike and the way that Mike does history, deals with history, for want of a better phrase, you really have a real sense of character. You're not just tossing describing Henry Hobhouse or Lord Sidmouth or Sam Bamford or whatever. They become real, living, breathing people than just historical characters that you're just simply threading the narrative together. So you're very mindful of character, you're mindful of narrative, and the kind of the ebb and flow of each chapter and how it sort of not ends on a cliffhanger, but sort of you're mindful of that the flow between scene by scene, chapter by chapter. And I think you're also very live to dialogue. You're live to, when you're quoting from sources, you're in the back of your mind, there is that, how dramatic is this? Does it not only propel the historical evidence forward, does it also add a bit of drama to it too? Is it, so you're very conscious of those sort of the experience of working on film to then sort of fold it into the experience of writing history. And I don't know if I've been successful or not, but I feel I've learned a hell of a lot working with Mike on both Mr. Turner and Peterloo. And I hope, in many ways, I think I'm a better historian and author of history as a result of working with him.
The film begins with the Battle of Waterloo and it ends with Peterloo, and there are 4 years between 1815 and 1819. Now, my job was by sleight of hand to make that work in such a way as you don't sit there thinking, 4 years has gone past. You don't think about 4 years, and it doesn't feel like 4 years, and it's important that I conceal the historical fact that it's 4 years, because we'd get stuck. And there were loads of events, some very significant, that happened within those 4 years, which the film absolutely doesn't deal with. I mean, there was a famous event known colloquially as the Blanketeers, with the guys which was an earlier attempt to go to London and present a petition to the Prince Regent and so on, by these people, and they never really made it because it was nipped in the bud. Now, if you put that in the film, it would simply preempt Peterloo. I mean, Hunt the orator came to Manchester before what in the film looks like the only time he's ever been there, and there was a famous event in the theatre there when he was at a show and at a play, and the soldiers were there, and there was a confrontation and a fracas, and they came back another night and they cancelled the play, and all that stuff went on. And there was 1816 was the year that, with no summer, because there was a massive volcanic event in Indonesia which cast a black cloud all over Europe, and there was no harvest. All of those things that made life difficult. Well, he couldn't put all that in the film. So the film is a responsible dramatisation. We debated whether to end the film and then have a whole bunch of cards going up and down saying, then this happened and so was arrested and the vote came, and finally, there was the Chartists and the trade union movement and the history of socialism and all that. The end of the film Suffragette, they very interestingly had a complete list of when women had the vote, right down to Saudi Arabia, where they still don't. Which is very interesting. And you thought, well, maybe we should do something like that. But my feeling was that will be wrong, because Peterloo ends and leaves you in a very emotional place because of what happens right at the end. It leaves you a space to be sympathetic, to be angry, to have a whole variety of feelings and emotions. And it's not so much that we thought, then people can go away and find out about it, which they can, but they're simply, apart from that, at an even more fundamental level, that they can do what I always do with my films. I never say, think this. I say, experience this, and now digest it, reflect on it, meditate on it, argue about it, etc. And I think that's how it should work, really. One is, how can the film be a tool in the classroom? Well, it's there. I would encourage people to go and see it, preferably, if possible, for boys and girls in school to go and see it on a big screen rather than just watch it on their phones, but because it is a big screen movie. But I also feel very strongly, well, two things really. One is that if the 60, 80, 100,000 people who were there at Peterloo, if they could be put into a time machine and brought to 2018, first of all, they would be shocked and horrified and disgusted by the fact that the thing they were fighting for, the vote, we have the vote, and people don't use it. But also, in the film, what you see are these working class young people who, there was no education, they are either self-taught, as you've referred to, or they went to Sunday school. They are not only articulate, but they're literate. And not only that, but they make these pictures and they quote the classics. They would be disgusted when they get out of the time machine in 2018 by the fact that we have education and we don't take it seriously. It's eschewed. It's, people are cynical about learning and things. They were hungry for education, hungry for knowledge. So those are my thoughts around the question of education and the franchise.